It's a great pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Mike Neumann, our U.S. Army War College Fellow, our visiting Defense Fellow for this year. And without further ado, I'll call on Mike to talk to us about mentorship in the Army and the Air Force.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate that. If you don't mind, I'm just going to walk around a little bit. So in the audience, just so I get some understanding, we have some former military. Is that right? Is that correct? We have some undergrad students. Is that correct? Some PhD students, some grad students, and some professors of all various sorts, right? And another person, right? So that's good, right? So I think when I gave these speeches before, or when I talked in front of an audience, it was easier because I kind of knew them. Right now, I really not unfamiliar with you all, but it's kind of good to know your audience and how I'm going to kind of guide this story about mentorship. So why should you care, right? Because mentorship is throughout everywhere, right? No matter what environment, what arena you serve in, right? You're an athlete, you're a professional, tradesman, academic, right? You have PhD advisors as you're going through, right? These are still all mentors. Military, government, and then if you're in the private sector or for your own personal and personal growth, right? But mentorship, by all means, right, is about people, right? It is about helping others. You have a choice, right? You can retain that knowledge or you can share that, right? So it's about development, right? Professional development, personal development, right? How do what's the best way to invest? What's the best way to have those conversations? Raising awareness and opportunities, right? So just because, hey, there might be someone with a little bit more experience, right? Like, for instance, in an academic environment, maybe, hey, I don't write well, I don't have clarity of thought, but I know someone who does. And you can kind of leverage that experience and raise awareness, and then how do you best get that to take advantage for yourself, right? And for the organization, right? And that's good. That's good, right? Challenging ideas, right? Sometimes when you talk to a mentor, it's a little bit easier to do before as a sounding board, before you want to get into that very divisive conversation with someone, or challenge the way you think. Well, hey, maybe that is not the way or the approach that you want to do. Maybe if you use this, that'll be better. Because sometimes, right, the pendulum always swings, right? Something happens and, we're very aware and we, every little incident, that's that, pointed out. And we can never bring it back to the middle where we can have a nice discussion, constructive, professional discussion, right? And then honest feedback, right? You need honest feedback. Some people have have a hard time knowing what professional and personal feedback is, right? And there is a difference, right? So, hey, we're talking about professional. This is what you need to do to become more of a professional. Sometimes they take that as a personal, and and you get self-esteem, and you get problems. But you need those honest feedback to grow and learn, because regardless of where you are, right, you got to continue to grow and continue to move on, right? Depending on how long a career can be. And then how are you going to make that organization better, right? Can you mentor an organization? Absolutely. Absolutely. Should you take me? Should you take someone better? Is there someone better for the organization, for the position? It's very hard to have that mature conversation, but it is inherently that we should leave an organization better than we found it. Some way, somehow. You can do that through mentorship. But as I've learned here, right, we have to go back in time. History is a beautiful thing, right? Where did mentorship come from, right? It came from the Greek. Odyssey, fought the Trojan War, left the son Telemachus to mentor, right, the old and wiser friend, and kind of shepherd him through, and built a strong relation, trust, support, right? So that is good, right? So that sets up the foundation, where we're going to go, right? And then we kind of bring that up and say, hey, what does the Army say, right? So the Army doesn't go back to say, hey, it must be someone older, but it does say, hey, someone with more of experience to less experience, right? So that is important here, right? Whether academically, whether militarily, right? Someone who has more experience. Now, can a 44-year-old learn from a 24-year-old? Absolutely. Does someone want to in their stage in life? It all depends. It all depends, right? When have you arrived that you cannot continue to learn? All depends, right? But what got me interested, right, was the process. What was the process? How do we, because most mentorship is through a chain of command, right? Direct relationship, But what's the process of learning that from outside? How do we get different perspectives if we're always kind of going back to the people that we serve with or work with and ask them the same thing over time? We're kind of only limiting ourselves to one perspective. So I want to know, hey, how do we do it outside of that? What can we do? So I looked at what the Army has to offer, right? So they mostly focused on, so there are some gaps, right? The Army wanted to kind of look at, hey, we're just going to use and talk about direct mentorship, right? So there were some gaps, right? Mostly focused on that direct mentorship. If I know you, you know me, let's form let's mentorship, right? Hey, it's as easy as that. Not quite. So some of you go to like some mandatory events, right? The boss is going, everybody's going, we all go there, we all mingle. It's kind of like speed dating, speed networking. And you don't really get an opportunity to do that. Now think about this, right? Think about where you are, right? 20 years you have in a profession or longer. And then you have someone who has 1 to 2 years. They really want to talk to you at that moment? It's intimidating. It is intimidating. It's intimidating to be in a room with all these PhDs. It's intimidating. I'm questioning whether you're going to go work over my research, Because I know you guys do it very well, and that's good. But it is also very, but it is very intimidating. And so how do you get them to kind of work through a room and do that, right? And so not everybody wants to do that. Somebody would rather do something else, right? Might want to not be here for lunch, right? Might want to work on something else. Or professional education opportunities, right? So, I'm an example of that, right? This is an amazing opportunity to get an entirely different perspective on problems, solutions, and look at things, right? Because who knows what the future is going to hold. And so having that opportunity, not everybody gets that. But when you do, maybe you're with peers, maybe you're with, not a various group, but that is another opportunity. So it's kind of limited. And then, what's the limit of technology, right? We kind of are comfortable now in this day and age with technology, right? Smartphones over there, smartwatch is going to tell me this. But how do we use that to leverage it? So I looked at what we have, right? And we don't have much, right? It's a career tracker, right? So maybe like you guys, right? I'm used to like Facebook, I look it up and, there's going to tell me some friend suggestions. I don't want to have to do the work. What else is out there, right? LinkedIn is going to tell me, hey, you may know these people by association, right? But, unless you know NOSL and you're going to type that in there, you're never going to find anybody. And then basically what you're doing is you're kind of cold calling for mentors, right? And, I want to know what else is out there. Can we do better? Maybe we can, right? So I looked at, hey, Air Force. Why not, right? Does it have applications here? 10 years ago, I went to Montgomery, Alabama, where I got educated when I was a major, and I thought, hey, these guys are always intuitive, right? They're kind of technology platform based, and so I wanted to look at their options and maybe how could that apply to everybody else, right? So hey, they have the kind of same direct approach, but they also have a web-based platform, right? But what they did is they also kind of customized characteristics, so you can kind of pick and choose what you're interested in, right? So if you go into a professional, academic school and you want to help with writing, maybe you want to find someone who has that in the background. right? You want to look with someone who has private sector because maybe you're getting out or maybe you're coming in, right? So good for introverts, right? I've talked to many individuals nowadays who, hey, give me a chat box and I will write everything that I need to. It is so much more comfortable to do that than if I have to sit here face to face and have a conversation with you. I cannot bear that. But believe it or not, I will get long text messages versus like, why can't I just get a phone call? I'll get long string text messages, which is unbelievable. And so maybe that is the way the environment is nowadays, right? So they did have career planning and mentorship on the same website, which allowed for visibility. So if you're going to go there anyways to make sure that you're progressing in your career, then hey, maybe you're going to look over and say, hey, what's this mentorship thing about? And then provides a balance, right? So someone's got to be held accountable. Okay, so I'm going to get in a relationship with you. Doesn't matter where you are. We're going to do that for 180 days or less. If we don't like it, then we can just get rid of it. If not, then hopefully that spurs on something a little bit further along. And then, hey, it's on the mentee, right? It's on the mentee. They're responsible. They're the one driving this change. There are expectations. What expectations do you want from me? Kind of liked it, right? And then I think one of the great things that I kind of learned even in the past week here is that it's no good if you don't get any feedback. How do you know if you're doing well? How do you know if it's good? How do you know if what you're providing is good to that individual? We think that we're giving good advice when it's like, yeah, it's horrible, horrible advice. And so maybe, some of that rate that plan, right? 5 stars, good stars, and that's good, right? And data is good, right? So what are the goals of the mentoring, right? So some of the goals that we have here are the promote growth, the leveraging the human capital, and then bringing on employees, right? It's important. With these goals, again, we talked about in the beginning, or I talked about in the beginning, touching on mentorship is about people and investing, right? We want to be able to retain talent. You go to a new organization and, it's terrible. The way you are received, the way that you come into an organization, and being in the military is a very dynamic shift than anything else that you've learned, right? But these applications can be used, again, just want to harp on again, not just in the military, but how are we bringing people on so that they feel comfortable, they feel good, and then we can continue to have them in our service, right? Talk about strategic knowledge and then new employees, which I wonder, right? Can we then bring people and let them go, transition, right? Potentially. So in that web-based platform, we talked about, I talked about the Direct Connect, and I think that's pretty easy, but those are the 12 different characteristics, right? Customize any which way you want, weigh them of importance and what you feel that's important, and and you can do that, and whether that's by, if you want someone a peer, if you want someone that's, you're in a certain situation for a temporary time, whether that's technical expertise, you can kind of change that any which way you want, which I thought was kind of a good opportunity, a good way of doing it. Something that I was more familiar with nowadays versus then, hunting and pecking and trying to find somebody. And maybe this is a good different approach, right, than just the direct method. And so here's what you have. Here's what it kind of looks at. And it was kind of nice, right? I got to pick, got to choose. I felt empowered. I got to put things that I want, which were important to me. And up came possible matches, right? Which was nice, And these people didn't have to be like located in Petawawa with me. Didn't have to be located in Trenton, but could be all over the country. Could be deployed. Could be civilians. Could be National Guard. Could be reserves. And so we're not just limiting ourselves to our local area, right? And that is good because, diversity of thought, different perspectives is what makes the organization and what makes you grow, right? And so on the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see the numbers, right? So cornucopia. Cornucopia. I still had 5 more pages to go of mentors that I could have selected, right? So, I mean, fighter pilot, aerospace, I mean, financial management, those are just different ways, but I could at least reach out to whom I wanted to reach out, set the conditions and manage my expectations. Very simple to use, right? Does that mean it's effective? Let's see, right? Look at the stats, right? Just rolled out. So the red is the personnel enrolled, right? So regardless, you know, you're going to do career planning. You're going to do that. So 160,000 just have to be in there, right? 15,000 made mentoring connections. Those are people who actually had a plan, right? So the next year went up a little bit more, but then, you know, in February of 2019, went up 30,000. That's not bad for 238,000, right? And I'm going to contrast that with what the Army did, and you'll see, right? But you know, it's an alternate approach. Is it better? Do we need to provide that? Considering the way the environment, considering the way technology is, maybe we need to consider how we're doing this. And I anticipate that even when February of 2020 happens, will you be even higher? Okay? So what's old is new again, or what's old is new again. So it's nothing new for the Army. So we did this before, back in 2005. Army Knowledge Online, right? You were there? You remember it?
Well, I remember when AKO went online, but I certainly don't remember anything about mentorship
Yeah.
linkage.
Yeah, nothing. Me neither.
It was just email.
Yeah, just email.
And
It's nothing,
random
right?
things.
Right? So, yeah, so nothing, right? It's not valued, not important, right? There was a senior leader strategy about leaving the legacy behind through mentorship. Army Knowledge Online, which was okay, but rather confusing. It's kind of like, you know, technology is supposed to make things easier. It's kind of like my thing yesterday. I went to go get some coffee and, you know, am I using the Apple Pay or do I touch the card? Do I insert the card? I'm sweating because there's a whole line waiting for me to pay. And I'm like, this is not intuitive. It's terrible, terrible. You guys are laughing because it resonates with you. Knows what that means, right? And, you know, people didn't know how to use the program, right? When it's kind of left up to your own devices, right? How do I do this? How do I fill these blocks in? Am I filling out as an officer? Does this mean officer? And I'm a non-commissioned officer. Does this apply here? And when you're filling it out, mistakes are going to happen. But if we have a large database, you know, we can get a lot of those things filled in, you know, to make it accurate, right? To get a better picture of how we want to do that. So that's where kind of some failures occurred. And then what happened in 2005? What were we really focused on? What mentorship was really going on? That was direct mentorship. Christian, stay with me and you will survive combat and we'll come back. That's really all that mattered. It wasn't technology. We weren't focused on that. So maybe, perhaps we were a little bit ahead of our game, right? Maybe we need to take another approach and dust this off and relook at this, right? And then social media, right? Social media and social networking, right? Not as prevalent, right? I was trying to think in my mind, what did I use? Was I using Facebook in 2004? Probably. I think I was using MySpace. I don't even know if that still exists. I can't even think what the other LinkedIn portion was at that time. I don't even remember if we had that. But, you know, these things are all just natural to us now, right? Send me your info. You want to connect? Hey, we'll get into LinkedIn. You know, check your phone, like I said before, and all these things are just natural, right? Phone's right there, smartphone, right? No flip phones, no trying to memorize one is A, B, C, you know, sending a text, all those things, right? So what did that result in? You know, so that resulted in this, right? So out of the overall users, right? So everybody that has AKO access, right? 1.9 million. Sputtering in to just under 1,300. 1,300 connections. It's not 130,000. It's 1,300. It's dismal. It is horrible. But maybe, right, maybe we need to kind of look at it again. Okay? And why? Right? What's the current environment? So in the Army, always got to reassess and reevaluate, right? Here's our current Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army. What are their current strategic themes and messages and priorities, right? People, modernization, talent, and talent management. When you kind of use words, and this audience I think understands, right? The center of gravity. Those are very big words, right? Greatest assets, right? The modernization strategy, more lethal, win our wars, and then come home. Changing to best position its personnel for national security requirements. I hope in this room those kind of words resonate. Right? That to me is very important. But as we kind of go through, regardless of what profession you are in, at least I can speak from the military. The military gives you a set of skills throughout your career. And as you progress in that, how are you going to capitalize on those opportunities? Right? So when the time comes for you to depart, whenever that may be, that transition is a little bit easier, or you understand how to capitalize on that, or use that to your knowledge, right? I mean, never had an idea that I could send my kids to a private school. Never had that understanding, right? But somebody had passed that knowledge on to me, and I was able to use that, right? And the military and the Department of Defense uses that, right? And so all of you out there, I know, have some little ways, techniques, procedures that you have learned from, right? Like I learned a big one just this past week. Start a working bibliography right up front, so you don't have to go back. So you don't have to go back and make that stuff up, right? But when you're out of the game, how do you give yourself some of these tools, right? And some of those things may seem very small and like, yeah, right, those are a matter of fact, not a big deal. But, as you kind of go through, you forget some of these things. And how are you passing it on to other people, right? But mentorship, perhaps, along the way, can help that, right? As your career goes up and down and through adversity or through good times and bad, right? Because people get frustrated. They absolutely do. They get frustrated with the system. And why do they get frustrated with the system? Perhaps they just don't know. Perhaps they're not aware. And maybe providing different opportunities in different ways to get that mentorship and get different perspectives is an opportunity to kind of keep them and invest in them. And how do we manage our talent a little bit better, right? Because some people, don't want to pursue, after 5 years of being in the military, hey, I no longer want to do this. Love the military, but I want to change directions. And mentorship and mentors can kind of help that, through that, to make it still a successful career. And that extends to families. And that broadens the aperture versus just kind of looking through maybe a problem or something through a soda straw. You kind of open your aperture up to a little bit. And sometimes those are things a little bit hard. But but what do we determine? How do we raise education? Do we raise education through experience, or do we raise education through school? There's probably a little bit of both. And then how do we make the organization better? But, I think just after, looking at mentorship and how we do that, hey, maybe we need to reassess. Maybe we need to modernize, with other uses too, right? So we're going through significant change. Every organization probably goes through turbulence, changing the guard, new apparatus, profit and loss reports are not happening. So what are we going to do to maintain the competitive edge? And we need to do that, right? So we're starting with talent management. I mean, we have guys like me going to take command in command positions, going through now assessments, right? They have to read, write, persuasive argument essays, all in a timed fashion, interviews, physical fitness assessments, those things we didn't do it before. It was just, you look at a file, whoever came out best amongst the 12 individual panel members won out, and they were rank ordered. But now, we should get a little bit more involved in how we do that. We're changing the way we do the combat fitness tests, right? The military, Combined Armed Forces, I think they changed theirs as well. Marksmanship is totally different, right? Totally different. We're going to do it now. So it's not just, engaging targets that are popping up. It's shoot, move, communicate. You only have two seconds or 5 seconds how to do it. And so where does Mentor kind of help that? Multi-domain task force, right? Air, land, sea, media, cyber, all those things, So how do we leverage everything? Futures Command. But there's a host of other applications as well, right? We talked about the cloud. How do we leverage data? How do we do that? So we can organization has to have the ability to look at themselves to be successful or to change, right? To make accurate data, to make informed decisions, right? Leaders and developers. Alternate means to connect people. Not everybody, just like, you all learn and take in things a different way. People want to connect in different ways, but what options are we providing that? Going mobile, right? I got to plug in a common access card to get in there, but, as we talked about before, like I can pay with my fingerprint. I should be able to have the access. We should be able to access, and we will have access to do that, right? So that all these things are on our phone, and we should be able to go mobile anywhere, and it's coming, right? Integrated personnel and pay system. So, if you will, human resources is going to be right at your fingertips, right? It's yours. You own it. You start it. You do with your pay. And that's on the move. So that will happen. And you could probably put mentorship in there, right? And I'm kind of curious, right? Onboarding of personnel, right? So that's bringing in new employees. Maybe there's a different way of how we do it. Maybe we're a little bit more focused in our mentorship in the first 5 years to kind of set the conditions a little bit for success in their future career, right? Maybe we focus a little bit more attention to that. Transition services, we just had a nice conference on that, but what opportunities are available in transition? How do we leverage, resumes? How do we get people to transition successfully from the military into the private sector or whatever they want to pursue? But how do we do that? Maybe we can do that a little bit better, right? Career coaching, another way of doing that, right? Someone's got to be able to push individuals to see the potential in yourselves that maybe you don't see, that you didn't think of, right? Many a times that I didn't want to do something and somebody told me to do it. And I was like, oh, gosh. But you know what? When you come through out the other end, you feel a lot better about that. And you're like, wow, I do that. I'm able to stand a little more confidently on my own 2 feet. It's kind of like when, Kim asked me to do this presentation. I didn't want to do it, but getting more reps in, you get a little bit more comfortable, right? And that's okay. But ultimately, right, I think it's about diversity. It's about relationships. It's about the conversation that we want to have. And in these times, we need to have a diversity of thought. How we think about things, because it's going to be ambiguous. Who knows what the future, at least the security environment, from my perspective, what's that going to hold? It could be very different, but maybe mentorship and how we do that can help us along with that. So with that, are there any questions or comments that I may take from the field?
Thanks, Mike. I'll let you do your own taking of comments.
Yes.
Mike, thanks very much. I've got
Yep.
another speaking opportunity for you in the
Good.
future.
Good.
So thank you so much yourself. Well, Steve Taylor, Callian Group Limited, private company, private sector. So I'd be interested as to how you looked at big business and others in your comparison to obviously US Army, US Air Force, and I know from my past military experience, we always look outside and quite often try to take on private business methods. Did you have a look at that? And
Sure. So this quick little research was the springboard, and that is the next evolution. And so I do want to look at other companies and how they do mentorship, and see what resonates and how they do it better. Because I think they're a little bit more to me, just looking at it, they're a little bit more invested, right? Because at the end of the day, if you don't make a profit, the company is not going to work. So that I would like to see from that lens how they apply it.
I'm sure my mentor wouldn't be invited.
Tormentor is a better
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
But I mean, but interesting, kind of jumping off of that, one of the interesting, from one of kind of our kind of mutual, our circle of folks that we've worked with, a guy that I know who got out of the U.S. Army, probably about, 2006, 2007, ended up working for Deloitte, big consulting, and one of the things that attracted him to Deloitte was the fact that he felt that they were one of the few kind of private corporations that actually valued kind of mentorship and professional development, kind of in the realm of how folks, at least in the U.S. Army, were kind of used to, because he had done a couple other jobs in a couple other corporate settings, and he was just like, it's not happening. There's nothing there in the terms of mentorship or getting you ready for leadership in it. So, I mean, just kind of,
Yeah.
I guess if you're looking for somebody to look to, apparently Deloitte might
Absolutely.
be a nice point of comparison.
Thank you very much. I'll look into that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, want to know if you'd comment a little bit on the developing of mentors, because this really speaks to accessing mentors.
Right.
And I'm curious as to the different cultures as to how they develop mentors. Because I've known my dad, in case in point, lovely gentleman. However, I wouldn't go to him for any sort of mentorship because he had no patience.
Right.
So again, how do you provide training? Do you provide assistance to the mentors themselves? And is this going to be part of the program?
Yeah. So we only know what we know, and so everyone has kind of a leader development strategy, and how you want to move the organization. Because at least in the military, for 2 years, if you're in a command position, that's your .com. How you want to do it, is that. So, and I think, to your question, how do you develop that? It is because you got to get in the game early. And I think where you recognize, right, because you can learn from good leaders and you can learn from bad leaders. And so as you're going through your career and looking through that, right, you kind of make some notes. Man, that I wish someone would have told me that a couple of years earlier. That, and you kind of put that in your rucksack, and when you kind of develop and say, hey, these, as we synthesize all the data and all the information that we have, then you kind of say, okay, here's what works and here's what doesn't work. And you kind of just leave that up to individuals, because that they told me there's only 2 times that you give advice. One is for safety, like, hey, you shouldn't go swimming there, there's sharks. And the second one is if someone asks for it. Because if they don't ask for you, they really don't care about what advice you're giving it, right? You're just giving freely, and you're probably just talking to the wall. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
No.
I'll be honest, because it sounds like, and it's as an ex-military guy, it sounds like our concept of mentoring is, if you've got the experience, you've got the time in, and you've succeeded, in our case, if you've got a command position, then you are automatically a mentor, or mentor material.
Right.
And I'm sort of curious as to whether or not there's a realization that not all mentors are leaders, and not all leaders are mentors.
Yeah, there absolutely is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I know you were at a reception, Mike. We did a workshop a week or 2 ago on mentoring for women who were transitioning from the military into civilian life. And actually, 2 of our facilitators have done PhDs here at Queen's related to mentoring, and they address specifically the qualities that are needed for mentoring. And in our workshop, and Vivi helped us run it, so she has to take some credit too, we basically weren't running it as a workshop for mentors or for mentees, because as you said, people can be both.
Right.
depending on your circumstances. So we actually have a little package on that,
Oh, good.
based on their PhD research that I can share with you. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And, so formal programs, right? So we kind of, in the research that I did, we kind of want to shy away from the formal program, right? There's enough. But interesting enough, when you look at big exercises, like where you're talking divisions and you're looking at brigade, colonel, full bird colonels, there are formal mentors for that, right? So if you're a 2-star general, you're going to get a 3-star general who's going to mentor you. If you're a full bird colonel, you're going to get a 1 or 2-star general who's going to mentor you and say, hey, look, this is what right looks like. But to your point, do we ever do that in a formal setting and talk about, hey, this is how you should properly mentor? And we just don't. We just don't. Yes, sir.
I'm going to weigh in on this one because I think, again, for me, good leadership implies mentorship. Like that's part of it. I think it's one of the principles. You develop your people, develop your team. So if you're a crappy mentor, you're not developing a team, so that makes you a bad leader. So I think the connection is very much implied and very much, one sort of drives the other. And that's what separates good leaders from bad leaders. Is a good leader is someone who will take the time to sit down and give you advice. It's ultimately the responsibility is on the mentee to follow that advice or not, and make that decision if that advice makes sense in the context. But I think what you've articulated here is that stark difference between the Army and the Air Force and their ability to access, which I think is the key problem. Because if you can't access the mentorship, no matter how great or horrible these mentors are, it doesn't really matter. That access is really critical. But I really think I totally agree with you, the formalizing of this would just add yet another barrier for people to get actual mentorship.
Yeah, with Tally as well, like Steve.
Thank you.
While he says I'm his mentor, it goes both ways. I have too many questions and a suggestion. So my too many questions are actually related to the U.S. Air Force program.
Yep.
One is, you mentioned the rating. Is there any place on there where like mentees or mentors get to assess the value of the program? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I have been mentored by someone for 6 months. That's a 6-month investment of, say an hour a week, whatever it is. Results. It was excellent. It was okay. It sucked.
Yep.
Or, like, is there any
Yeah,
rating methodology in there?
so that rate the mentorship plan,
Yep.
you can give it 1 through 5 stars.
Okay.
You can add comments.
Then they can aggregate it and check the effectiveness of the program later? Is that the idea?
Exactly. Yeah, so that is the question that I had asked.
Yeah.
And so that is the next phase of the operation
Okay.
to do
Okay.
that.
All right. That's
Because
good.
I think that is critical.
Yeah. The second thing was, so is everyone who's in the U.S. Air Force, who let's say is a certain rank level or years of service, automatically in the database as a mentor,
No,
or they have to kind of sign up and say, I'm willing to give
it's
that time?
it's all
So it's all
voluntary.
voluntary. Okay,
All
that's actually a good outcome. So the advice, or sorry, the piece of information I was going to offer is I'm with an organization called Toastmasters International. It's a
Yeah.
public speaking and leadership institution,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
bears a striking resemblance to the military for some reason. And they have one of the best mentoring kind of resource packages, philosophies out there. It's a shame more clubs don't use it. They'd probably be in better shape, but my club totally embraced it, and our club is going gangbusters.
Good.
I actually use it in a church context as well, and it's very relevant in a military context. So it's something to look at. And most of their stuff is available for free from their website.
Okay, great.
So
Thank you.
throw that in.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
I just wonder with this whole mentorship thing, because I mean, you and I will kind of know from our mutual experience, like somewhere in the 90s, the U.S. Army globbed on to this concept of mentoring. Like somewhere a crop of general officers who probably served in Vietnam and served in the bad days of the 70s remembered, I got through that because of mentors. And generally mentors were people who had been your boss in the past that you just maintained.
Right.
You know, the formal relationship transitioned into an informal relationship, and it was somebody you could just kind of continually go back to and, hey, what assignments do I need? Is this a good assignment? Is this a bad assignment? My boss is being a jerk. What do I do about this? And somewhere along the way, I think, and this is just my perspective, somewhere in the 90s and probably early 2000s, the Army decided to kind of try to formalize this. I mean, to the point where now, like you're talking about, like you go to the NTC and
Right.
you've got somebody mentoring you, which I'm not sure if that kind of fits the original concept of mentoring, but sometimes it just feels like this is the Army kind of just, they hooked onto this and now they're just ramming this and trying to kind of pound the proverbial square peg into the round hole to try and solve a lot of other issues.
Sure, but I think, we're kind of self-policing.
Yeah.
But again, I wanted to look at different approaches and different ways to give access, right? So if you have someone within your direct chain of command, right, there are probably some negatives with that, right? Because I go to the boss all the time, is that favoritism? Because, I'm a high performer, I'm always going to get mentored. Because I'm a low performer, I'm not. Or because I cause trouble, that's why I'm getting mentored. But everybody in the middle is not, right? Or, I'm going to go to someone who I want to be honest with you, but deep in my mind, I know you're going to give me an evaluation and a grade. And you can't be, and sometimes that's a hard thing to do because you want to say things and they're like automatically going to think, wow, I didn't expect that. You just kind of moved in a different trending downward. When maybe, if I had a mentor outside of that chain of command to be like, hey, what do you think I should do? Yeah, I definitely would not want to say that. Or this is how I would approach that. And sometimes this is very difficult to do that. But formal mentorship, that costs a lot of money. So that's why I think they only do it at warfighters, certain times a year. But I'm going to look into them as well.
No, I just wonder if like this whole idea of mentorship at exercises, if that's, if the construct is just kind of, like I said, just kind of taking this construct of mentorship and slapping it on top of something as opposed to what traditionally, like at least in the U.S. Army, mentorship was kind of a long-term, guidance counselor / friend,
a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
Progression.
Yeah.
It's Mike, you picked an important topic. I'm excited about the transition from the short to the long paper. Maybe one of the critical issues will be the conceptual clarifications and definitions. And I think that I'm hearing the comments around the room and the use of air quotes. And I think that definitional clarity here is key because there can be a lot of confusion and overlap between mentorship, coaching, leadership,
Right.
training, instructing. And I think that doing some of that definitional work up front, and you've done some of it from the Greeks to the Army doctrine, but putting it in a kind of matrix where we can see these overlapping categories and then having a more precise definition of what mentorship means and what it entails is incredibly useful. I think that it'll be useful even beyond the military because I think this is a trend. This is definitely trending, this focus on mentorship. And the other thing that I think is lacking in this world is guidance for both mentors and mentees.
Yeah.
I think it was alluded to by Bill, but with the organization Women in International Security, we've been doing mentorship a lot over the past decade in Canada, and one thing that we've noticed is that people often come to that relationship with different expectations.
Yeah.
And a lot can be done to prepare the relationship in terms of setting expectations and guidance, and I find that lacking. So just in terms of translating the research then into recommendations, some best practices on guidance for both mentors and mentees.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, Anna.
Maybe just like a personal question. If you could maybe talk a little bit for yourself about like what the mentors in your life, the qualities that they had that really made them good mentors, or maybe that didn't make them good mentors?
I think it was just honest, genuine feedback. I've had mentors from all different walks of life, and some of them I thought that had lots of mentors. They didn't have really any. But I think once we started to get in the conversation and started asking questions and kind of developed what Stephanie had said, like what the expectations are, then it kind of blossomed, and I still maintain a lot of contact with those mentors. And they were always willing, you know, I think they were always willing to spend time, you know, to say, you know, hey, sir, I have a question, or hey, ma'am, I have a question. What do you think about this? Hey, give me a call, and let's talk about that. You know, one of the often times that I always appreciate about mentors is like, well, hey, Mike, what does your spouse say about that? And I'm like, wow, I really didn't consider that. I guess I should, but we all kind of, you know, fall on it, because what may be really good for us may not be best for the entire unit, you know, the family unit. So they're always genuine, and we always had a lot of laughs. There was always a lot of humor involved, which I think if you cannot laugh at yourself and you can't have a good time with all these things, then you know, you need to check yourself again, because it's, you know, and you only live once, you know, and that's a thing too, right? So regardless of where you serve or what you do, you only live once. So think about that, right? I'm not going to be this young after today, and it approaches very quickly, you know. And when you kind of put that into context with the time, it's like, wow, you know, like I don't have a lot of time. I don't do that. I could retire right now if I wanted to. What would I do? But I think, you know, those kind of characteristics have always stuck out with me. Just genuine, good people.
If I could add to that, having been 30 years in the British Army and not had a mentor.
Really?
Not really. It was really formal and the chain of command. But then coming into a different situation, an unknown situation really, where I lacked experience, I sought a mentor who had knowledge of what I'm going through and experience of that. And those two in particular were particularly useful in my recent history. Certain people know probably who I'm talking about, so I won't name names. But you know, just to get together for a coffee, and that individual, they've been there, done it, and they have that depth of knowledge and experience. It's vital for those that are thrown into a position where you are lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Yeah, thanks.
Mike, can you reflect on possible disincentives for large organizations to try and create formal mentorship programs? Are there downsides to the creation of a formal mentorship program as opposed to the informal kind?
I would say, you know, when you put two people together and they don't want to be there, right? That's number one to me, right? You are now my mentor. Oh gosh, how do I do this, right? And then it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like there's a lot of tasks. There's a lot of time and energy. So how do you want to spend that? Do you want to go pick and choose, or do you just want to say, you know, hey, I'm going to start mentoring? And when you start doing competing for time, I think, you know, when you have a formal mentorship program, it's kind of like, okay, well, you know, I can mentor you, which we all say, and all the leaders say, hey, that's talent management and mentorship and leader development is extremely important. However, you know, I need you to do all these other things first to do that. And so I think that some of the downsides is that you know, there's no flexibility. You know, there's no way. So in some regards, I think a formal one wouldn't be bad, but I think it's just the flexibility and to be able to have a relationship and kind of, you know, start off a conversation first and then kind of go from there. But it does work. In some instances, it does work. West Point has one. You know, as you're a brand new cadet, they link you up with some family there on post, and that's isolated and small, and they kind of make you kind of go through that. And you don't really probably want to do that, but that's how mentorship, you know, because those are usually officers or NCOs that you're dealing with. So it does work. I wouldn't discount it, but for a large organization, it'd be kind of tough, in my opinion.
Well, in that case, let me, on behalf of all of us here, thank Mike very much for this particular window into a part of operations that aren't often thought about. So,
Welcome.
very appreciative, and as a small token of our appreciation, thank you. Good. And
Thank you very much.
there we go. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And stick around here if you have any other questions.